From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, coming to you from 1540 WADK Newport. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. It's our annual version of a Top 10 show, now in its 41st year. PricewaterhouseCoopers Emerging Trends in Real Estate, the 2020 report, out recently, will unveil the top 10 emerging cities in the nation and key real estate trends. All on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Mitch Roschelle is partner at PwC and one of the firm's business development leaders. He's a founder of PwC's real estate advisory practice, widely recognized commentator on real estate, housing, business, trends, capital markets, the retail industry, the economy, University of Michigan football, Syracuse football, a lot of stuff. And he is a regular guest panel member on Fox Business Network with Maria Bartiromo, who's been a guest to this show and who is great. He's co-publisher of Emerging Trends in Real Estate, serves as a trustee of the PwC Charitable Foundation, where he leads its grant-making efforts in youth education and financial literacy. And PwC's partner in this survey every year is the Urban Land Institute, nonprofit education and research institute. Its mission, providing leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating and sustaining thriving communities. Big lead-in for Mitch there. How are you?
I'm excellent.
In his fourth year here, of the 41st year overall. And is Harbaugh going to win any Big Ten games eventually or not?
Here's my strategy with Michigan football, by the way. You go to the game, which often costs you a lot of money, but you lawfully bet on the other team, so that way you've hedged.
That's a brilliant strategy.
I went to the Peach Bowl last year. I took my son. We had a good time. And then, of course, they lost to Florida. Had I have wagered, lawfully, mind you,
you could have paid your whole
I could have paid for the whole trip because Michigan was favored.
I still love Harbaugh. He's a great coach.
Yeah.
And actually, you have twin sons, right? Because Syracuse is at the other end, and you're going there
Correct.
today.
I'm going to Syracuse as we speak. I'm going to slide down the dinosaur when we're done with this segment and say yabba dabba do.
Tell us again the driving force, the criteria behind the emerging cities top 10.
Sure. We interviewed 2,200, which is a record. Last year I said 2,100 was a record, so we interviewed 2,200. That's either a face-to-face interview or an electronic survey. Those are real estate players from around the world, sort of in every possible vocation or walk of life in real estate. And we asked them a variety of questions which guide the report. But one of the questions we asked that gets a lot of attention is, what are the top 10 cities? There's 90 cities, and they rank them, and I'll unveil later in this program the top 10.
All righty. The basic methodology is?
Really, what we're trying to do, and one of the questions we start with, Jim, is we ask, what are the prospects for profitability for the industry? So we try to drill down into all the different property types of real estate and how they feel about them, whether or not investors feel now's the time to sell or to buy. But the first question we ask in the survey is, what are the prospects for profitability for the upcoming year? And we use that almost as a barometer or a sentiment index for real estate. And I would say, surprisingly, and perhaps I'll define why I said that, use that adverb, but surprisingly, the prospects for profitability in the eyes of these 2,200 individuals are virtually the same this year as they were last year. Now, I probably said the exact same thing on your program last year, but what's really interesting to me is that in light of all of the geopolitical risk and uncertainty that's out there on the planet, why would people feel so good about real estate today as they did last year? You would just intellectually think that wouldn't be the case. You would think perhaps that real estate is a risky investment, and why would people be leaning into a risky investment in a time when there's more risk out there? What we've realized is, if you go back in history, and I mean going back to biblical times, there's really two ways that wealth has been accumulated on the planet. One of which is the real estate asset class, which I'll come back to, obviously. And the other is what I'll call the precious metals basket, because if you go back to biblical times, those were the only two ways you could accumulate wealth. What happens is, within the precious metals basket, and today that's every trading asset, so any asset for which a trade can be settled, so that's currency, that's gold, that's stocks, bonds. When there's uncertainty in the environment, people tend to shift towards the safest assets in that basket. So you see a flight to quality towards gold, you see a flight to quality towards bonds, okay? But when there's a stimuli out there that creates more risk, they shift away from that trading asset basket towards property. So right now, real estate, which is yielding higher than stocks and bonds in a lot of cases, real estate looks even more attractive. So all of those factors that you would think would cause people to run away from real estate actually has them running to real estate. So while the composition of who may have voted yes, I feel strongly about real estate this year, may have shifted a little bit amongst our 2,200 survey respondents, the fact of the matter is, as a group, they feel as strong today as they did a year ago. And that, to me, is probably more important than any of the things that we say in the report, because it's widely read by the real estate community, and I think it's an endorsement of themselves that, you know what, we picked the right asset class for today.
Let me ask you, do they see, though, on the horizon these rumors we have of recession, whether it comes after the election or even heading into it?
You know, we didn't ask the question per se about recession, but I'm on the roadshow tour now, as you guys have noted from my social media posts. And so I do get to engage with people around the country around that risk. And what's interesting is in this expansion, this economic expansion that's now 10 years plus, we have not, when I say we, the real estate world has not overbuilt the way we have in every other economic expansion. So if you look at additions to new supply of anything, and if time permits, we could talk about housing and the affordability issue in housing. There's an affordability issue in housing because we haven't built new supply, and there is demand. But whether it be office buildings, hotels, what have you, perhaps with the exception, and even I would say retail. Retail, we haven't at all added to new supply. The problem is we don't have demand. But if you don't have excess supply, if demand falls a little bit, you're not as hurt as in all other expansions that I've witnessed in my 35 years in this industry. As soon as the economy gets good again, boom, you start building.
That's interesting, and maybe that's because in 2008, the entire real crash was driven by overbuilding of real estate, too much leverage loans, et cetera.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Jim, if you look at there was a lot of talk, and you did it on your program as well, about this phenomenon of the inverted yield curve and it being a harbinger of a recession. The fact of the matter is, if you look at past recessions, they weren't always preceded by an inverted yield curve, but almost all of them in recent history, if not all of them in recent history, have been preceded by some asset bubble. And two of those asset bubbles were real estate. The financial crisis was real estate, mostly in the form of housing. And then the savings and loan crisis was mostly all commercial real estate. Right now, there is no asset bubble in real estate. So if there is a recession, I think real estate folks can look at themselves in the mirror and say, we didn't cause this one.
I don't want to get too technical, but the industry sort of measures itself by cap rates, right?
Yes.
Are those changing at all? And maybe discuss what
so
that means.
What a cap rate is, for those of you in your car that can't Google it as we're talking, it's really the initial cash-on-cash yield of a piece of real estate. What's interesting is if you compare those yields to other financial instruments, whether they be Treasury securities, whether it be the dividend yield on the S&P 500, cap rates have held up. Real estate returns have held up better, and they are less volatile than their companion yield. So in a marketplace right now where investors are, quote unquote, chasing for yield because they can't find yield in other instruments, real estate, again, as I said at the open, remains attractive. So you do see compression of all returns, because benchmark returns, although real estate cap rates or real estate yields are not indexed per se to treasuries, but in a period of falling yields, all yields tend to fall.
Right.
But there's the spread between real estate yields and treasuries is really is pretty wide. So it makes it attractive. Hopefully that didn't get people to change their channels.
You touched on this briefly. In the report says a home ownership as at a low since the 20s, and that's affordability issue?
Yeah, I would say there's two things happening in affordability and in housing. Number one is there is a little bit of a secular shift where people say, you know what, why buy? I may not see appreciation. I've now lost some tax benefits. Why buy? Rent seems like a better value proposition to me. So that would be secular. On the cyclical side of things, you do have affordability as a challenge. Now, for many, mortgage interest rates have fallen. It's interesting is it's not decoupled completely from the Fed's actions, but They did fall in anticipation of the Fed lowering rates, which they've done twice, which they may do a third time before this year is over. So that has helped affordability somewhat. But the fact of the matter is there's more demand in the case of household formations than there are as additions to new supply. This week, the housing starts number came out, and it was, again, a little sluggish. Optimism in the home building industry is strong. Home builder sentiment is very, very strong. But there are factors that are preventing home builders from building homes profitably, so they're not adding to supply. So that's what's making it an affordability problem. So very simply, I could have just said yes in terms of affordability, but I figured I'd give the audience a backstory.
And your timing ends up being great. Listen to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll talk about some leading trends in the next segment.
Would you like to host your own radio program or podcast? Park City Productions 06604 is a Bridgeport, Connecticut-based radio broadcast solutions company. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Park City Productions 06604. Call us at 203-522-8801.
Are you from California, Illinois, New York, Georgia, or any of the other 39 states that charge state income tax? Does your state claim you owe them any amount of back taxes? Or have you not filed in years? Is your heart pounding because you know they're wrong or you just don't have the money? Don't fight the state income tax board alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you. The state is much more aggressive than the IRS in collecting taxes. They have the power to take your home, your car, your driver's and business licenses, even garnish your wages, freeze your bank accounts, and go after your spouse. Solve all your income tax problems permanently and keep more of your hard-earned money. Make this 100% guaranteed risk-free call right now.
800-985-1610. 800-985-1610. 800-985-1610. That's 800-985-1610.
And we're back talking with PwC's real estate research leader, after having built the practice, Mitch Roschelle. And look at some demographic stuff as well. And you got to explain what this means and where it came from. Hipsterbia.
I'd have to get the right combination of smoked meat and wine to tell you exactly where it came from. No, in all honesty, really, Jim, because we've known each other for so long, every year we try to come up with a term that no one's used before. Yeah. So that's why. But what's interesting is, and this is a trend we've observed over time, so I wouldn't say it's brand spanking new in terms of it being emerging. We just slapped a name on it. But as young people start moving away from cities and start forming families and start looking at where they want to live in the surrounds of the city, they find suburbs. It's inevitable. It's a force of nature. It happens in every generation. As much as young people, regardless of what generation they're in, say, I'm never moving from where I am. When they start trying to figure out where to park a stroller in a small apartment, I don't care what city you're in, you say, we're getting out of here, okay? And where do they go? They go to the suburbs. But what's happening now is the suburbs themselves, in order to really meet the demands of a more urban customer, if you will, they need to be more hip. So there are suburbs that by, I guess, force of nature, and I've used the term twice today, but are becoming more hip. If you're in the New York metropolitan area, think about the river towns in Westchester County, the Irvington, the Dobbs Ferry, the Hastings. Those are way hipper suburbs today than they were perhaps 10 years ago. And what's happening is that the folks that are moving there want the types of urban amenities. They want them to be very walkable. So there are a lot of people that live very, very close to the train in those communities, and they can literally walk to the train. And you need a car if you live in the suburbs. The question is, do you need two cars? And if you can get away with one car, that's probably the the early warning sign that you're in a more hip suburb, where things are more walkable. So hip and suburbs, we put them together and we came up with hipsterbia, and that's what that is. And by the way, I did describe some river towns in the New York metropolitan area. However, you go look in Austin, Texas, you look in Nashville, and some of these cities that we're going to talk about later, the suburbs that are being created there, in many cases, some of which for the first time, the new construction of these suburbs are way hipper than perhaps the white picket fence suburbs that we all grew up in.
Interesting. If I got this right from the report, even Yonkers is kind of hip now.
You know, it's funny. When I graduated from Bentley College, now university, forget about all the Michigan and Syracuse that Jim makes fun of me for. Where did I move? I moved to Yonkers, and it was not hip in 1983. No. I'm going to tell you that right now. Yeah. But it certainly is today. The more the stuff near down by the river is the hipper version of it, but there are pockets of it. And what's interesting about a suburb like Yonkers, considerably more affordable than some other suburbs and closer to the city. So those are the things that are shorter commute, and they're basically writing the rules and saying we need more kale in the supermarket, we need more skinny lattes.
Hate that stuff. It's funny though. My wife grew up in Yonkers, and in her era, people moved out of Yonkers, and now people kind of, going in there.
It's the other way. But you know what's interesting? Like, let's take the New York metropolitan area, and sorry, folks who may be listening who have no idea what we're talking about. Yeah. But Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn was a lyric in a Billy Joel song that went on to say, you may be crazy, right? And there was a line in there that said, as an indication that you're crazy, is you walked through Bedford-Stuy alone. And now they're flocking to Bed-Stuy. So what's happening is some of these places that you would not think are hip have become hip by sort of insertion of thousands of young people.
Probably in 1983 again, Brooklyn wasn't very.
I don't think it was. But I picked Yonkers, and I did well with that in real estate investments. So
and I grew up in Allstate, which is owned by Sears, right? Are retail malls dead? I mean, there's a big state-of-the-art one supposedly going up in Norwalk right off the highway.
Retail malls are not dead. Well, a couple of things. If it's built in the right area, meaning people still live near there. So you could look in America and find a big, shiny mall. I wouldn't say it's new, but it's right near a factory that's closed or a car plant that employed 9,000 people that shuttered. Yep. That mall may have some near-term problems, if not long-term problems. However, if the mall's still where people live, the question is, what's it being used for? And what we're now finding is malls being turned into something else. They could be places where people work, and some of those shops can be turned into office. There is a tremendous need for medical office as we age. If aging population still lives in the area, instead of driving to a office park to go see your doctor and then have to get into the car and drive to another office park to get the x-ray that the doctor ordered, what if that urgent care, what if that those specialty physicians were all in a mall setting, but there were also the amenities of a mall? So we're seeing the reclassification of what the use of a mall is. The problem is there are some owners of those malls who think they're going to scare their retail tenants away when they start putting medical office in there. But wait a second, everybody still loves the food court, so.
And also things like fitness centers are going in there, right? So you can actually, you're actually there to work out.
And you can also appeal to multiple generations in one facility. So we're seeing more and more of that. So I would not say the mall is dead. What I will say is there are some components of the retail uses in that mall that have been disrupted considerably by e-commerce and just by other forces over time. But I think a well-located mall that's been maintained well and has a big, thriving population around it, if you can just figure out what people want inside the mall, it'll be fine.
Do these younger generations, are they focused on sustainability in a real way? They're living it, or?
That's a hard question to ask. I think that more and more focus is being paid to healthy choices in diet and other things like that would support the notion of more sustainable. However, what's really fascinating about sustainability in general is so it started with like the LEED certification in office buildings, and companies saying, we're not going to move to that building unless it's LEED certified. And that's what really suddenly forced it. I think the first time somebody asked me about sustainable office buildings, I said, oh, that'll never stick.
Yeah.
Boy, I was wrong. Now what's happening is capital, equity, the dollars that are invested have standards that they can have to invest in assets that meet certain sustainability requirements. And now what's happening is the dollars are starting to demand it. So there is a crunch going on in real estate to force sustainability. The last leg of that demand is the actual tenants who live in the actual space, not the corporate tenants who sign office leases, but the young couple that are renting their first apartment. What do they require from a sustainability perspective? So I think to meet the demands of all those stakeholders, it's happening, and it's still competitive. All right, so while there may be excess demand versus supply, there still are 4 different apartments that are on the market that a young couple can potentially lease. And if you want to make sure you get that tenant, you may need to have that building be certified as sustainable. So.
All right, coming next, the top 10 emerging cities unveiled from this year's PwC Urban Land Institute survey. All right, we're back with Mitch Roschelle, PwC. He's on his road trip, hyping the new report, but importantly, what everybody's always waiting for.
But I do get to Greenwich, Connecticut on that road trip.
We won't ask where Greenwich ranks. I saw where Fairfield County ranked. Maybe we'll talk about that in the next segment. All right, let's get right to it. People have been waiting for that. Obviously, the top 10 hot emerging markets.
Do we have a drum roll in the background? Do we not? Don't you don't?
It'll be added.
He'll put it in post. All right, I'm going to go from 10 to 1.
Okay.
So 10 is Seattle, where I was earlier this week. 9, Los Angeles. 8, Atlanta. 7, Orlando. 6, Dallas. 5, Boston. And now we're in the top 4. 4 is Charlotte. 3, Nashville. 2, Raleigh-Durham. And number 1, returning to the number 1 spot, Austin, Texas.
Let's talk about them now. In Austin, the first thing that always comes to mind is
barbecue.
University of Texas is there, right?
Yeah, I think about the Salt Lake, which is about an hour away for barbecue. But you know what? Look at them. If you look at the top 3, Austin, Raleigh-Durham, and Nashville, they're all tied to universities in some way, shape, or form. Raleigh-Durham has all of those schools in a triangle. I'm not a big Duke fan. I'm more of a North Carolina, Chapel Hill kind of guy. But you've got that in the triangle. And Nashville's got Vandy and other schools. Everybody thinks about Vandy, but they have other schools. And obviously UT is in Austin. So that is the secret sauce. So one could say, why is Columbus, Ohio not in the top 10 list? And as a Michigan fan, I'm not going to answer that. Okay, but the fact of the matter is the skill gap in our labor market is real. And when you have an environment where you're pumping out students that have some combination of the right skills for the workforce of the future, and mostly STEM skills, finance skills, business acumen, entrepreneurial spirit, all of those things that the workforce today demands, IT skills in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. And they walk out the door with their cap and gown, and they have a job already from employers that are local. They're likely going to stay. What are those 3, 4 cities in the top? I'll include Boston to some degree. Boston's more of a metropolis, so its data is a little wacky. But let's just take the top 4. Those cities all have population growth at least 2 times the national population growth average. Wow. What do those 4 cities all have in common? They're all in states that have no tax or low tax. They're all in states that have very affordable cost of doing business for business, okay? Employers are going down there because they know that there's talent. Kids are graduating from the school, having a job.
And want to
they
stay
like
there.
it there, and they go. So, by the way, parents, if you're listening, if you send your kid to a school in one of these places, you may never see them again, right?
But they'll have a job.
They'll have a job.
They won't be living at home like around here.
They won't be playing Fortnite laying on your couch. They're going to be employed. So that's really the thing. And if you look more deeply at the rest of the list, you see affordability across many of those cities. Dallas remains affordable. Dallas, very diverse employment base. Orlando, incredibly affordable. Orlando's in Florida. When you close your eyes and think of Florida, you think of being on a plane that has nothing but wheelchairs lined up on the jet bridge, right? Orlando is getting younger and younger, and it's not because people are going to Disney, okay, or any of the theme parks that are there. Orlando's getting younger and younger because people are moving there because there's a growing employment base beyond just the theme park and entertainment industry. And Atlanta's been sneakily in our top 10 for quite a while.
Is that affordable, Atlanta, though?
It is affordable. There was a period of time, I think 3 years ago when I was doing this tour, that I had a slide that I used to show where it was cheaper to buy a home economically in the Atlanta suburbs than it was to rent an apartment in those same suburbs. Okay.
Wow.
So I think that's changed quite a bit. But
now, they had a big infrastructure problem, right? You lived in those suburbs.
But by the way, look at the top 10. Tell me where you're not sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic, okay? I mean,
is that right, even in these other towns?
Austin is.
Austin
is terrible. Nashville. I will be in Nashville in the beginning of December for a speaking engagement. That'll be the third time I've been to Nashville this year. And I can tell you firsthand experience, the traffic from the airport to the city is just hellacious at times. Yeah, that's becoming a thing, traffic. It's a real thing. The last piece of the puzzle for these places is infrastructure. But I'll tell you what they'll do. They'll be smart, these cities, and they will figure out public-private partnerships that make a lot of sense for infrastructure.
Which we haven't figured out around here. Is the SALT, the bill, the state and local tax cut, that's hurt this area badly, right?
Yes. So the limitation on your ability to deduct state and local tax, and just to be clear, that includes both property tax that you pay as a homeowner as well as state income taxes, that individual state income taxes, capped at $10,000. That has hurt high tax areas. But I have a chart that I show when I speak. If you go back to 2010 and carry that forward through the end of 2018, the net migration away from big cities, coastal cities, towards, and this is just by state, Texas has grown by 1 million people, and Florida's grown by 1.1 million people in the aggregate in 8 years. You can't do that since the implementation of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Okay, that didn't just happen. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was signed in December of 2017, and the tax returns, if you filed your return, the latest possible extension date, October of 2019 for your 2018 tax return, they're just getting those tax returns now, the IRS, okay? So we don't really know how that's impacted people in terms of taxes being paid yet. And people's decisions to move didn't start when President Trump signed that tax bill. So this has been happening. It's a force of nature, and taxes are something that people just don't like to pay. And I'm not talking about older folks retiring who care about the estate tax. I'm talking about young people who get their first paycheck who said, get me out of here.
Yeah. These Texas, North Carolina, Tennessee, are they low state income tax?
So they're either no or they're right. So Texas and Florida have no state income taxes. And then the Carolinas, Tennessee, it depends, either have no or low taxes. But also, Jim, you can't overlook the business taxes. So not every one of these people who moves are individuals that are just looking at their W-2 that they get from their employer. Some of these people are own businesses, and they're thinking about it from a business perspective. Let's say you have a small landscaping business and you sort of thrive in the Northeast. Well, if the population's growing 3 times faster in Austin, Texas, than it is in New York, why wouldn't you go where the population's growing and start your landscaping business?
How about L.A.? That wouldn't seem to kind of fit.
I think L.A. falls in the basket of, just like Dallas, although Dallas is considerably more affordable, as being a diverse employment base. So you have financial services, you have entertainment, you have a lot of the things that you have in New York. You also have the creation of new places to live in Los Angeles that are more affordable. And if you have not been to Los Angeles in a while, check out downtown Los Angeles. When you think about Los Angeles, you think about people getting in their car to drive to the next door neighbor's house, literally like that movie from years ago.
And you think of the downtown as empty.
Downtown as being scary, okay? Downtown Los Angeles now looks like some neighborhood in Manhattan where like the streets don't roll up at 5 o'clock and everything's walkable. In fact, I speak every year at an event in the second week of December in Los Angeles. And if you follow me on Twitter, it's Mitch_Roschelle. You can find out where I'm speaking. But in any event, when I speak there, I said to the concierge or the dude in front of the hotel, the bellhop guy, I said, how can I get to blah, 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 Figueroa Street? And he pointed. When in Los Angeles would normally that guy would have said, can I get you a cab?
Yeah.
Or like pull out your Uber or Lyft app, pal. Now they point where I can walk there. That is the most un-LA thing ever. That's why people are moving to LA.
You know, my daughter graduated with a master's from USC, and in her gown afterwards, we walk across the street and get on the tube or subway, whatever they call it, and right back downtown. And, So from graduation even. I guess quickly, in the next 10, are there any ones that stick out to you? Tampa, St. Pete?
Yes.
Northern Virginia.
So Northern Virginia, I think, was a sentimental vote based upon HQ2 being in that neck of the woods. But Tampa's the one I want to focus on. Last year was in the top 10. And I don't influence the outcome here, but I would say that sort of may belong more in the top 10 in some respects than Seattle.
Okay.
But it's marginally there. It's number 11. Tampa's a great story of taking a downtown, in that case the waterfront there, and a lot of credit goes to the outgoing mayor, Bob Buckhorn, and the two mayors before him that were of different political parties who said, let's push politics aside and let's figure out how to grow this economy, and let's not point fingers at my predecessor. And they built and rezoned the waterfront, and it is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's pretty.
And if that is where all of the young people want to live, and they put a stadium down there, and that's really smart. But you know what their biggest problem is? Traffic. So, but Tampa is my sentimental pick. 4 years ago, I was speaking in Tampa, and I think it was he was in his first term as mayor, Bob Buckhorn, and he said to me, he listened to me speak, and I was flattered, and he asked me to meet with him afterwards, and he said, Tampa was like 35 at the time, and he said, what does Tampa need to do to be in the top 10? And we talked for about 45 minutes, and they pulled it off. And that's why, to me, Tampa is one in that list worth mentioning, because when you really focus on it and you get the legislature, the city council to really focus on the right things as opposed to the wrong things and push a lot of petty politics aside, but they really focused on rebuilding that downtown, that waterfront, and it is phenomenal.
All right, some future emerging cities in the final segment. That's our final segment with Mitch Roschelle, PwC's real estate trends expert. And it's always interesting to see who we might be looking for on next year's report. And I want to ask him first because he mentioned his arch rival of Ann Arbor, Columbus, Ohio. By the way, I did a consulting, it's a beautiful area.
Yeah, and the suburbs there, like Worthington and some of those. And, there's some big employers there. If you like square burgers, there's a burger company or two that
Kemlon used to be there. I don't know where they are now.
I think, and the Wendy's is there. White Castle's there. I think the Limited stores were there, or L Brand, whatever it's called now. But there's a lot of employers there. But what's interesting is it's the same thing. I would say if the weather was nicer in Columbus, Ohio, all year round, it would be Austin, Texas. There's not a lot of difference. It's just a smaller scale. It also is very, very affordable. I haven't been there in a while, so I don't know how hip their suburbs are. But they have an installed base, a term we often use when we're talking about technology companies. They have an installed base of workers that are very, very loyal. And they want to run back to that stadium to watch that team. I don't know why they would. Maybe because they probably beat Michigan every year. But
7 years in a row, I think.
Yeah. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of
that's Midwest, by the way. I grew up there. Loyalty, you're right.
That's right. There is a lot of geographic loyalty. But on the next list of up-and-comers, one of them is Jacksonville. I go down there every year and speak. And, boy, there's a thriving economy. It doesn't seem very Florida because it's a lot closer to Georgia, but it is a very, very thriving economy. A lot of young business owners go there. It's incredibly affordable. It's close to the water, like the Ponte Vedra area. You can live by the beach. Nice. They've fared pretty well in hurricanes, knock on wood, for the last couple of years or last couple of cycles. And it's really a tremendous place. I have a couple of friends who own businesses down there, one of which had a business in the Bronx, and he merged with a company down there, and as opposed to staying here, they decided to start the business up there. And I check in with a lot of the local folks there when I speak. They also have a very pro-business environment there. The state legislatures from that neck of the woods are very, very pro-business. The other one's on the next list to watch is Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City, I believe 2 years ago, was in the top 10. But Salt Lake City has a lot of the attributes of, in Austin in terms of being an incubation place for startups. There's no shortage of capital that can come for those businesses there because the university is there. We have two. You have Brigham Young. We also have University of Utah or Utah State or whatever. I'm messing that one up. But they have a lot of innovation there, and the kids who go to those schools have no problem raising capital for investments because of some of the alumni from those schools.
Yeah.
The cost of doing business in Salt Lake City is like 12 percentage points lower than the national cost of doing business. And if you like to see, I think it's an affordable alternative to Denver. And Denver is just getting very expensive, and there's a lot of quality of life crime issues going on in Denver now.
Related to legalization?
You can make that cause and effect look if you want, but so I think Salt Lake City is a little bit cleaner for some that care about those kinds of things. But that's one that we're looking for. So those three cities that aren't yet on the top 10.
How about Pittsburgh? That's an interesting one.
I'm sorry, I forgot that. Jim, you were spot on. Pittsburgh. What an innovation hub that is. And there's a story of a city that was down in the dumps because of all of the industry that was gone. And they have schools there that are focusing on training students for the next generation of jobs. There are tech jobs being created in Pittsburgh like crazy.
And Carnegie Mellon is there.
Carnegie Mellon's there. But there's University of Pittsburgh that is playing the Syracuse Orangemen tonight in the Carrier Dome. And
it's a Friday night game.
Friday night game, baby. Yeah, wow. Under the lights. Friday night lights in Syracuse, New York. I'm wearing orange, people, right now, just so you can close your eyes.
Are you getting Syracuse in the top 10 someday?
I don't think Syracuse is. A professor on campus asked me about last year when I spoke up there about Syracuse in the top 10. I said to him, do you have any other questions? But you know something? If you think about Syracuse and some of the urban blight that exists in Syracuse, and you think about Syracuse and some of the what's the local version of geopolitical, but some of the challenges that they have there doesn't seem very different from what Pittsburgh was like or what Detroit was like. Interesting thing about Detroit, which is not in my next list, but when we went from 51 cities in our survey to 90, are my partners in this publication, as you mentioned, Urban Land Institute, were pushing back on me for a variety of reasons. And they said, give me one reason why we should do this. And I said, because Detroit is number 51. And I'm curious, because this is early in post-financial crisis. I said, I'm curious if we made it more than 51 cities, if Detroit would be 52 or 53 or whatever it was. And they said, well, I don't want to do that just for your little science experiment. You know what? We went to 70 cities, Jim, and you know what Detroit was? 35.
Wow.
Detroit is a phenomenal story.
And I remember when they had the Silverdome, right?
Yes.
Got shut down. You could buy the Silverdome when things were bad there for $600,000.
Yeah,
which is an outhouse in Greenwich.
I thought
the stadium.
You're gonna see how cool I am at 58. But I thought that rapper Travis Scott wanted to buy the Astrodome in Houston. But
it's pretty exciting there, because Detroit was, you talk about down in the dumps, the auto industry.
There's still some, street level crime issues that are there, but there are startups like crazy. In fact, I used to be on the board of something called Venture for America that was founded by Andrew Yang.
Oh, yes. When we interviewed him,
oh, did you?
Yeah. This is before he announced you. Oh. No, it was right after he announced.
If you want to get him back, I'll get him. Andrew and I still text all the time. But Detroit is the big success story for Venture for America in terms of startups that they have helped create and jobs that they've helped create. And it's really phenomenal. Matter of fact, our PwC Charitable Foundation, which you mentioned, funded a documentary of a film called Startup Nation, and it may still be on Netflix. I encourage you to watch it.
That was a good thing.
It's the story of Detroit and Venture for America, so it's worth watching.
Okay, 30 seconds then. Was the killing of HQ2 a big deal here?
No. I have a long-form theory for perhaps another segment about what that was all about. But the fact of the matter is, it wasn't clear whether or not they were really ultimately going to go to some of those cities. It's a boom for the D.C. suburbs in Virginia, and I think there's a lot of reasons why it's a tragedy that we've lost them in Queens. But we lost the positive right? We're not.
Did he get the negative? That
I don't know that we got the negative, but the fact of the matter is 25,000 more jobs would have created 100,000 jobs, which that's a shame.
Which is pretty cool. Yeah. Thanks. This is one of our favorite shows every year, and Mitch always nicely comes into the studio. Mitch Roschelle, the report's Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2020. And they'll be back with number 42 next year. PwC, 158 countries they're in, 236,000 people. Urban Land Institute has 45,000 members. Thanks, Mitch. Good luck, Syracuse, tonight.
Go Orange and go Blue as well.
On your way out.